There is a specific kind of silence that does not feel like quiet. It feels like the world has just taken a breath and forgotten to let it out. It is the silence that sits in the 2 seconds between a doctor looking at a screen and a doctor looking at you. And you already knowing, somewhere beneath every layer of hope and love and trust, you have spent years carefully building, that whatever comes next is going to change the direction of your entire life. I know that silence. I have lived inside it. On a Tuesday morning in February, 7 months pregnant, lying on an examination table with my husband sitting 3 feet away scrolling his phone like it was any other ordinary day, that silence found me. The machine stopped, the room changed, and the life I thought I was living cracked open and showed me what had been underneath it the entire time. My name is Clara Meadows. I'm 31 years old, married for 2 years to a man I loved completely and defended to anyone who ever suggested something about him did not sit right. I was happy. Or I believed I was happy. And I have since learned that those 2 things are not always the same thing. Sometimes happiness is a structure someone else built around you so carefully and so deliberately that you never once thought to ask who put the walls there and why they were slowly, quietly closing in. What the doctor saw that morning was not a problem with my baby. My daughter was perfect. What he saw was something in me. Something my body had been recording for months while my mind was busy making excuses. And when he asked my husband to step outside, I watched something move across that familiar face, fast, gone in less than a second. But I saw it. The word for what moved across his face before the easy smile returned was not surprise. It was fear. He was afraid of what the doctor knew. He was afraid of what I was about to find out. And he had every single reason to be. Before we go deeper, let us know in the comments where you are watching from. We would love to hear from you. And please hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming stories. Now let me take you back to the beginning. Because to understand what the doctor found, you need to understand who I was before Daniel. And who Daniel was before he needed me to stop seeing clearly. I grew up in a small town called Gallatin, just outside of Nashville, Tennessee. Middle child of 3. My older brother Marcus was the athlete, the golden one, the son who filled every room he walked into with noise and laughter. My younger sister Joy was the baby, soft and sweet and endlessly protected. And then there was me, Clara, the quiet one, the one who noticed everything, remembered birthdays, kept secrets, and showed up without being asked. My mother used to say I had an old soul. It took me until I was 31 years old lying on a hospital examination table to understand that old souls are not just perceptive. They are also often the most vulnerable to a very specific kind of person. The kind who recognizes depth and uses it. I was the child who absorbed everything and asked for very little. That pattern, the pattern of making myself smaller to keep the peace, did not start with Daniel. It started in Gallatin the first time I swallowed a feeling because the room did not seem like the right place for it. By the time I was an adult, it was not even a conscious decision anymore. It was just who I was. And people like Daniel can spot that quality from across a room. He spotted it at a dinner party in East Nashville on a cool October night when I was 28 years old and so tired from the week I had almost not gone. Daniel Carter was standing by the bookshelf when I walked in. Tall, composed, entirely comfortable in any room he entered. He looked at me with the kind of attention that does not feel like flattery. It felt like recognition. We talked for 4 hours that night and he remembered everything, every detail, every name, every thread of every story I told. I felt known in a way I had never felt before. I did not understand then that there is a difference between being known and being studied. That the attention was not intimacy, it was inventory. And I had just handed him everything that mattered to me. Everything that, in the wrong hands, could be used to build a version of love so convincing it would take a doctor, a blood work report, and a 2 a.m. text message to finally dismantle it. We were engaged 14 months after that night. My sister Joy asked quietly if something felt right in my gut, and not just in my heart. I told her she was being overprotective. What I did not tell her was that there were moments, small and always easily explained away, when something in Daniel shifted. A flash of coldness when plans changed. A quiet withdrawal after time I spent with people outside of him. Moments so small and so consistently followed by warmth that I filed them away and told myself I was overthinking. I was wrong. And my body knew it long before my mind was willing to catch up. We married on a Saturday in April at a vineyard outside Nashville. My grandmother Eleanor flew in from Savannah and held my hands before I walked down the aisle and said, "Clara, a good man makes you feel safe even when he is not in the room." I told her I would remember. I remembered the words. I stopped applying them the moment doing so required a question I was not ready to answer. My grandmother passed away 14 months into my marriage and left me everything she had. $300,000 saved quietly over 40 years, so the women who came after her would always have a floor to stand on. Daniel was attentive and steady through my grief. And then 6 weeks after the funeral, he suggested moving a portion of the inheritance into a joint account. "We are partners, Clara," he said. "What is mine is yours, and what is yours is mine." I thought it sounded right. I did not know I was not entering a partnership. I did not know he had already been in contact with a woman named Rachel for 3 months. I did not know the joint account was not the beginning of a shared future. It was the beginning of a plan. And I was the only one at that kitchen table who did not know it. In the months that followed, he moved money in transfers small enough to avoid every automatic alert. $20,000 in October, $15,000 in November, $12,000 in December. By the time I found out he had moved $63,000, my grandmother's money, gone in a pattern quiet enough to miss and deliberate enough to destroy. Until a Monday night when I could not sleep, and his phone lit up on the nightstand and a message from a contact saved only as R said 7 words I have never stopped hearing. "Did you move the rest of it yet?" I lay in the dark with those 7 words moving through me like something cold and certain. I thought about the joint account. I thought about the inheritance. I thought about every moment in 2 years of marriage that I had explained away. And I breathed as slowly as I could and waited for the morning. I had no idea that morning was going to give me far more than a heartbeat. I had no idea that a stranger in a white coat was about to see what my husband had been counting on me never to find. The appointment was at 9. Daniel drove, cheerful, reaching across to hold my hand at the red light the way he always did. I held it back and kept my face completely still. We checked in. We sat in the waiting room. Daniel scrolled his phone. I watched him and said nothing. Dr. Aaron Webb came in quiet and steady, reviewed the screen, made several notes, and then asked Daniel to step outside. Daniel laughed, that familiar, easy laugh. "Whatever you need to say, you can say in front of me, doctor. She is my wife." And Dr. Webb looked at him with the unruffled steadiness of a man who was not going to be charmed and said, "I understand that. But I am asking you to step outside." The laugh faded. Daniel touched my shoulder and left. The door closed, and Dr. Webb turned to me and said the words that split my life in two. "Mrs. Carter, are you safe at home?" I stared at him. Not because the question surprised me, because the part of me that had been awake for 4 hours in the dark had already known it was coming. He explained that my blood work from the previous 3 prenatal visits showed elevated cortisol and stress hormone markers inconsistent with typical pregnancy anxiety. That the imaging that morning combined with my reported symptoms, the disrupted sleep, the anxiety I had been calling pregnancy nerves, the persistent headaches, told a picture he could not, in good conscience, leave unaddressed. He was not making an accusation. He was asking a question his training and conscience required him to ask. He believed I had been under sustained psychological stress for an extended period of time, and he believed the source was relational. He did not say Daniel's name. He did not have to, because I had spent 4 hours in the dark with 7 words, and I already knew. He handed me a card for a domestic violence advocate and explained gently that what he was describing did not require bruises or raised voices. My sustained emotional stress imposed by an intimate partner was a form of harm. It had a name. I folded the card into my coat pocket and said thank you. He nodded. He understood everything those 2 words contained. Daniel came back in. Concerned face. Right on time. Is everything okay? Is the baby okay? I looked at my husband and said everything is fine. The baby is perfect. And I smiled. Because I had just made a decision. I was not going to tell him what I knew. Not yet. And so I smiled, and we walked out into the cold February air, his hand on my back and my hand on my stomach, and inside my coat pocket, folded into a perfect square, was a card that was about to change the direction of everything. And inside my mind, quiet and certain and no longer willing to be silenced, were 3 questions. Who is R? What is the rest of it? And how long has this been going on? I was going to find out. And what I found over the next 3 weeks was going to be more than enough to open a folder on a kitchen table on a Sunday morning and watch 2 years of deliberate performance finally and quietly come to an end. The first thing I did when Daniel left for work the morning after the appointment was sit at the kitchen table with a cup of tea I did not drink and a legal pad I had pulled from the drawer, and I wrote down everything I could remember. Not feelings, not suspicions, facts, dates, amounts, moments. I wrote down the date of the inheritance conversation. I wrote down the date Daniel had first suggested the joint account. I wrote down every instance I could recall of him handling a financial matter that I had been happy to let him handle, because he was always so capable and so confident and so entirely convincing that it had never once occurred to me to ask for the details. I filled 3 pages before I even opened a laptop, and what I saw when I laid those 3 pages side by side was not a collection of isolated moments. It was a timeline. It was a sequence. It was the architecture of something that had been constructed with patience and intention over a period of time long enough to be invisible to anyone who was only looking at one piece of it at a time. That is the thing about patterns. They only become legible when you step back far enough to see the whole shape. I had never stepped back. I had always been too close, too trusting, too willing to look at each individual moment as its own separate thing rather than as part of something larger. Well, that morning I stepped back for the first time, and what I saw made the tea go cold while I sat very still and looked at 3 pages of my own handwriting and understood, with a clarity that was almost physical, that I had not been living inside a marriage. I had been living inside a strategy. I called my sister Joy that afternoon. I had not spoken to her properly in 3 months. Not because anything had happened between us, but because Daniel had a way of making evenings and weekends fill up with other things, other plans, other priorities, so that the people who had been closest to me before him had gradually, gently, almost imperceptibly moved to the edges of my daily life. I had not noticed how far they had moved until I was sitting alone in my kitchen with 3 pages of handwritten notes and the sudden, urgent need to hear the voice of someone who had known me before Daniel Carter had any idea I existed. Joy answered on the 2nd ring. I said her name and she said, "Oh, Clara," and something in the way she said it told me she had been waiting. Not for a crisis necessarily, just for me, just for the call. Just for the moment when her quiet, capable, so always fine sister finally admitted that something was not fine. I did not tell her everything that day. I told her enough. I told her about the text message. I told her about the doctor. I told her about the card still folded in my coat pocket. And she was quiet for a long moment, and then she said, "I am coming." I told her not to. I told her I needed to do this carefully and quietly, and that Daniel could not know anything had changed. She understood. I think she knew me well enough to know that when I said I needed to do something a specific way, I had already thought it through more thoroughly than most people think anything through. She stayed home, but she was on the phone with me every single day for the next 3 weeks, and that mattered more than I can adequately express, because one of the most effective things that happens inside the kind of relationship I was in is that you lose your witnesses, the people who knew you before. The people who can look at you and say, this is not who you are. This is not what you deserve. This is not normal. You lose them so gradually you do not notice they are gone until you need them and reach for them and find the distance between you is wider than you realized. Joy was my witness, and having her voice in my ear every day while I quietly, methodically dismantled 2 years of carefully constructed illusion was the thing that kept me grounded when everything I had believed about my life was rearranging itself into something unrecognizable. The financial picture took me 10 days to fully understand. I am not a forensic accountant. I am a nonprofit program coordinator with a good head for organization and a grandmother who taught me to keep records of everything. I started with what I had access to. Our joint account statements going back 24 months, our shared credit card history, the household budget spreadsheet Daniel had set up in the first year of our marriage that I had always appreciated for its thoroughness and never looked at closely enough to notice what it was actually doing. What it was actually doing was providing a very convincing picture of our shared financial life, while an entirely separate financial life operated in the background. I found the first discrepancy on the 11th day. A recurring transfer, small enough to look like a subscription service, going out on the 14th of every month to an account number I did not recognize. I wrote it down. I kept looking. I found 3 more within the next 2 days. Different amounts, different dates, all within ranges that would not trigger an automatic alert, all going to account numbers that meant nothing to me. And then I did something I had not done in 2 years of marriage. I called our bank directly. I identified myself. I asked for a full statement history on every account associated with my name and my social security number. The woman on the phone was patient and professional. She put me on hold for 4 minutes. And when she came back, she told me that in addition to our joint checking account and my individual savings account, there were 3 additional accounts that had been opened using my name and social security number as a secondary holder in the past 18 months. I wrote down the account numbers with a hand that was completely steady. I thanked her. I hung up. And I sat in the quiet of my kitchen, and I looked at what I had written, and I understood that the text message from R had not been about a single transfer. It had been about a system, a careful, methodical, patient system built on my name and my inheritance and my complete and trusting ignorance. And somewhere at the center of that system was a woman whose contact name in my husband's phone was a single initial. It was time to find out who she was. Rachel Nguyen was not difficult to find once I knew where to look. The account numbers led me, through a conversation with a financial advisor friend of Joy's who agreed to help me understand what I was looking at, to a registered financial services firm in Brentwood, Tennessee. A small boutique firm, private clients only. I found the firm's website. I found the list of advisors. And there, third from the left in a row of professional headshots, it was a woman in her early 40s with dark hair and a composed, professional smile. Rachel Nguyen, senior financial advisor. I looked at her photograph for a long time. I did not feel what I expected to feel. I did not feel rage. I did not feel the hot, immediate devastation of betrayal in the way I might have if this had been a conventional affair. What I felt was something colder and more clarifying than rage. I felt the specific, crystalline clarity of a puzzle that has just revealed its final piece. Because Rachel Nguyen was not a woman my husband was in love with. She was a professional. She was someone he had hired. Someone he had engaged specifically for her expertise in moving money in ways that were difficult to trace and easy to explain away. This was not passion. This was not weakness. This was not the familiar, almost comprehensible human failure of falling for someone else. This was deliberate. This was calculated. This was a man who had identified an opportunity, developed a plan, and executed it with patience and precision over a period of 18 months while I cooked dinner and went to prenatal appointments and chose nursery colors and trusted him with everything I had. That realization did not break me. I want to be clear about that because I think it is important. It did not break me. It completed something. It took every feeling I had been carrying without a name, the low-grade unease, the moments of unexplained distance, the body that knew before the mind was ready, and it gave them all a shape. And a shape, even a terrible one, is something you can work with. A shape is something you can respond to. I had 3 weeks of information. I had account numbers and transfer records and a name and a timeline. I had my sister on the phone every evening. I had the card from Dr. Aaron Webb's office in my coat pocket and a domestic violence advocate named Sandra, who I had called on the 12th day and who had spent 2 hours on the phone with me, not telling me what to do, but helping me understand what I was dealing with and what my options were and what the process looked like if I chose to pursue it. I had everything I needed. What I needed now was one more thing. I needed a lawyer, and I needed a Sunday morning. I found the lawyer through Sandra, the advocate. Her name was Patricia Holloway. She was 52 years old, a family law attorney with 26 years of experience, and she had the specific, unhurried competence of someone who has seen every variation of the thing you are bringing to her and knows exactly what to do with all of it. I met her on a Thursday afternoon, telling Daniel I had a prenatal checkup, and I sat in her office with my 3 pages of notes and my printed bank statements and my list of account numbers, and I laid everything on her desk, and I watched her read through it with the focused attention of someone assembling a case in real time. She asked me precise, methodical questions. I gave her precise, methodical answers. She made notes. She made referrals. There she connected me with a financial forensic investigator named Gregory Ash, who spent the following 4 days constructing a complete picture of what had been done, how it had been done, and what the legal exposure was for every party involved. What Gregory found confirmed everything I had pieced together from the kitchen table and expanded it in ways that made Patricia Holloway set her pen down and look at me with the specific expression of someone who wants to make sure you are prepared for what you are about to hear. The 3 accounts opened in my name without my knowledge or meaningful consent. The $63,000 transferred across 18 months in increments carefully calibrated to avoid detection. The paper trail connecting those transfers to Rachel Nguyen's firm. And one additional detail that Gregory had uncovered that I had not anticipated. Daniel had taken out a life insurance policy on me 11 months earlier, a significant one, with himself as the sole beneficiary. He had signed the application using my information during a period when I had given him power of attorney to handle several estate matters following my grandmother's death. A power of attorney I had signed willingly, gratefully, never imagining it would be used for anything other than what it was intended for. Patricia Holloway looked at me across her desk when Gregory finished presenting his findings, and she said, "Clara, I want you to understand the full picture of what we are looking at here." I said I was ready, and she told me. And I sat in that chair, 7.5 months pregnant, and I listened to the complete shape of the thing I had been living inside. And when she was finished, I asked her one question. I asked her what I needed to do. She told me. I did exactly what she said. I want to pause here and speak directly to you for a moment. Because I know that some of you listening to this are sitting with a feeling right now that you have been calling something other than what it is. Maybe you are calling it stress. Maybe you are calling it a rough patch. Maybe you are calling it his bad week or your anxiety or the normal difficulty of building a life with another person. And I am not here to tell you what your relationship is. Only you can know that. But I am here to tell you what I wish someone had told me 3 years before that ultrasound appointment. The body keeps a record of everything the mind agrees to overlook. And when the record gets long enough, when the overlooking has been going on for long enough, the body finds a way to make itself heard. It will speak through your sleep, through your appetite, through a persistent, unnamed heaviness that you carry from room to room and cannot set down, through a feeling quiet and certain and impossible to fully silence that something is wrong. That feeling is not anxiety. That feeling is not weakness. That feeling is information. And you are allowed to take it seriously. You are allowed to pay attention. You are allowed to ask the questions that scare you most. Because the alternative is lying awake in the dark with someone else's phone screen illuminating 7 words you were never supposed to see, realizing that the life you have been protecting with your silence was never as safe as your silence made it seem. You deserve better than that. And so does every woman who loves you and has been watching from the edges of a life that has been slowly, quietly narrowing. Now, let me tell you about the Sunday morning. Because that Sunday morning was where the pattern finally broke, and it did not break the way you might expect. It did not break loudly. It broke the way all quiet things break, with a stillness that was somehow louder than anything that had come before it. It was the 3rd Sunday after the ultrasound appointment. Daniel was at the kitchen table with his coffee and the newspaper he still read in print because he said screens gave him headaches, a detail I had always found endearing and now found simply interesting in the way that all details become simply interesting once you have stopped seeing them through the lens of love and started seeing them through the lens of information. I had been up since 5. I had not slept well in 3 weeks, but I had become very good at appearing rested. I had become, in those 3 weeks, an entirely competent performer. Not of happiness exactly, of normalcy, of the version of myself Daniel expected to find across the breakfast table, the version that was still inside the pattern, the version that could be managed. I made coffee. I sat down across from him. I placed a folder on the table between us. He looked at it, then at me. And something in my face, some quality of stillness that was different from my ordinary quiet, some absence of the particular softness he had always been able to rely on, made him set the newspaper down. "What is this?" he said. His voice was easy, almost casual, the voice of a man who was not yet certain he had anything to be concerned about. I said, "It is a record. I would like you to look at it." He opened the folder. He looked at the first page. And I watched the performance do something I had never seen it do in 2 years of marriage. I watched it stall, not collapse, not shatter, stall, the way an engine stalls when it encounters something it was not built to process. He turned to the 2nd page, then the 3rd. And by the 4th page, the page with the life insurance policy, the performance was no longer running at all. He closed the folder. He set it back on the table between us. He did not look at me immediately. He looked at the surface of the folder for a moment, a long moment, and I watched him calculate. I watched him go through the options the way I imagine someone goes through options when the story they have been telling has just been laid out in its entirety on a kitchen table by the person they were telling it about. And then he looked up, and he said, "How did you find out?" Not, "You have this wrong." Not, "I can explain." How did you find out? 4 words. And in those 4 words, every single thing I had spent 3 weeks building a case to prove was confirmed without a single additional piece of evidence. I did not feel triumph. I want to be clear about that too. I did not feel the satisfaction of being right. I felt the specific, exhausting grief of having been right about the worst possible thing, of having hoped, even through 3 weeks of evidence, that somehow the picture would turn out to be something other than what it was. He said, "What are you going to do?" And I told him. Calmly. Specifically. I told him Patricia Holloway's name. I told him Gregory Ash's name. I told him that Rachel Nguyen had already been contacted by Gregory's team and had chosen, very wisely, to cooperate fully with the investigation. I told him that the accounts had been frozen pending the legal process. I told him that I was leaving. Not that day. Not with drama or a slammed door or the kind of exit that makes a moment feel like a scene. I was leaving properly and legally and with every piece of documentation in order. Because I had not spent 3 weeks building a case to walk away from it messily. I had spent 3 weeks building a case to walk away from it completely. He said nothing for a long time. And then he said, "Clara, just my name." And I understood what he was trying to do with it. He was trying to find the woman who had sat across from him for 2 years and explained everything away. The woman who had filed feelings into drawers and given benefit of the doubt and made herself smaller to keep the peace. He was looking for her in my face. She was not there anymore. She had been gone since a Tuesday morning in February when a doctor asked 4 words, and something shifted that was never going to shift back. I moved into Joy's house that afternoon. 1 bag, 2 boxes of things that mattered, the folder, my grandmother's jewelry. Joy opened the door before I had finished parking. She did not say anything. She just held the door open and I walked through it, and she closed it behind me, and that was that. The house I had shared with Daniel Carter for 2 years was behind me. The life I had believed I was living inside was behind me, and ahead of me was a guest bedroom with clean sheets and my sister's voice through the wall and the particular, fragile, enormous quiet of a woman who has just set down something very heavy and is standing in the absence of its weight, trying to remember what her own body feels like without it. I will not tell you that the weeks that followed were easy. They were not. Leaving is not the end of a pattern. It is the beginning of the work of understanding it. Patricia Holloway guided me through the legal process with the patience of someone who understood that her client was also 7 and then 8 months pregnant, and that the practical and the emotional were happening simultaneously, and that both deserved attention. The accounts were untangled. The fraudulently opened accounts were closed. The money that could be recovered was recovered. And not all of it. $63,000 had moved through enough channels that a portion of it was going to require a longer legal process to reclaim. But a significant portion came back. Enough to rebuild the floor. Enough to honor what my grandmother had intended when she spent 40 years saving in $20 increments so that the women who came after her would always have somewhere to stand. Rachel Nguyen cooperated fully with the investigation in exchange for a reduced professional consequence. She lost her license for 2 years. Daniel Carter was charged with financial fraud, identity theft, and 2 additional charges related to the unauthorized use of the power of attorney. He did not go to trial. He took a plea agreement. He served 8 months and was released on supervised probation with a requirement to repay the full amount of the transferred funds over a structured timeline that Patricia Holloway had negotiated with a precision that I found genuinely impressive. I was not in the courtroom for the agreement. I did not need to be. I had done everything I needed to do at a kitchen table on a Sunday morning with a folder and a stillness that was stronger than anything he had built. My daughter was born on a Thursday morning in April, 6 weeks after I left the house in Daniel's name and moved into Joy's guest room. She arrived 3 days before her due date, healthy and furious about the whole business of being born, which I found immediately relatable. I held her for the first time, and I thought about my grandmother, about the specific quality of love that builds things quietly and without announcement so that the people who come after you have something solid beneath their feet. I thought about the floor, about how close I had come to losing it entirely, about the man who had sat across from me at a kitchen table and thought that my silence was the same thing as my compliance, about the doctor who had turned off a machine and asked 4 words and given me permission to believe what I already knew. I named her Eleanor, after my grandmother, because some patterns deserve to be continued. The pattern of quiet, dignified, unannounced strength. The pattern of building something real in small increments over a long period of time. The pattern of making sure the women who come after you always have somewhere to stand. Eleanor is 3 years old now. She has my grandmother's eyes and my stubbornness and an opinion about everything that she delivers with a confidence I find both exhausting and deeply encouraging. She will not be a woman who files feelings into drawers. I am making sure of that. Not by telling her what I went through. Not yet. She is 3 and her primary concerns are dinosaurs and whether her socks have the right texture. But by modeling for her, every single day, what it looks like to trust yourself, to take your own feelings seriously, to ask the questions that scare you rather than explain them away, to understand that love is not supposed to cost you your floor. It is not supposed to require your silence. It is not supposed to feel like a performance you have to maintain or a pattern you have to fit yourself into. Real love, the kind my grandmother described when she held my hands before I walked down the aisle, makes you feel safe even when the person is not in the room. If it does not feel like that, it is worth paying attention to. It is worth asking the questions. It is worth trusting the body that has been keeping the record even when the mind was too afraid to look. I want to tell you about the moment 3 months after Eleanor was born when I went back to see Dr. Aaron Webb. I had requested the appointment specifically to tell him what had happened. Not because he needed to know for medical reasons, because he deserved to know that the question he had asked had mattered, that the card he had handed me had been used, that the 4 words he had spoken in a quiet examination room on a February morning had contributed, directly and significantly, to a woman and her daughter being safe. He was exactly as I remembered him. Quiet, steady, the particular calm of someone entirely at peace with the work they do. I told him everything. Not all of it. There was too much for one appointment. But enough. I told him about the 3 weeks, about Patricia Holloway and Gregory Ash, about the Sunday morning and the folder and the 4 words that confirmed everything, about Eleanor, about joy, about my grandmother's jewelry sitting in a box in my sister's house and the floor that was still standing. He listened without interrupting. And when I finished, he was quiet for a moment and then he said, "I am glad you came back." I told him I almost had not. I told him that there had been a version of that day in his office where I took the card and put it in my pocket and never unfolded it. Where I went home and talked myself out of everything I had started to understand. Where I chose the explanation over the truth because the explanation was so much easier to live inside. He nodded. He said he knew that version existed for many of the women he had that conversation with. He said it was the version that kept him awake sometimes. The ones who took the card and put it away and never called. I thought about those women for a long time afterward. I still think about them. I made this story for them as much as for myself. For every woman who has a card in her pocket that she has not unfolded yet. For every woman whose body is keeping a record that her mind has not yet agreed to read. For every woman who is lying awake in the dark, turning someone else's words over and over and telling herself she is overthinking. You are not overthinking. The record your body is keeping is accurate, and you are allowed to read it. I want to spend some time now talking about the patterns, not just Daniel's patterns, the patterns that made me available to someone like Daniel, the patterns I carried into that relationship from long before that October dinner party, the patterns that, if I do not look at them directly and honestly, I risk carrying into everything that comes next. Because that is the thing that most stories like this one never get to. They tell you what happened. They do not tell you why it was able to happen. And the why is where the real work lives. The first pattern I want to talk about is the one I described at the beginning of this story. The pattern of making yourself smaller to keep the peace. I learned this pattern in Gallatin in a house where love was real but attention was finite, and the smoothest path through family life was to need less, give more, and never make anyone uncomfortable with the full weight of what you were feeling. I do not blame my parents for this. They were doing their best with what they had. But I want to be honest about where it started because I think a lot of women listening to this know exactly what I am describing. The experience of learning, early and thoroughly, that your feelings are most welcome when they are manageable, when they are quiet, when they do not require too much from the people around you. And the way that lesson, absorbed early enough and practiced long enough, becomes a kind of chronic self-abandonment dressed up as easygoing personality. I was not easygoing. I was trained. There is a difference. And Daniel did not create that training. He simply recognized it and used it. That is the thing about people who operate the way Daniel operated. They do not manufacture your vulnerabilities. They find them. They are extraordinarily good at finding them. The intensity of his attention at the beginning was not random. It was targeted. He was looking for the specific contours of who I was and how I had learned to manage myself in relationship to other people. He found a woman who had spent 28 years practicing the art of explaining away her own discomfort. And he built an entire architecture on that foundation, which means that the most important work I have done since leaving is not the legal work. It is not financial recovery. It is the work of understanding why I was so practiced at that particular art, and deciding, deliberately and every single day, to practice something different. The second pattern I want to name is love bombing, because I think it is one of the most misunderstood dynamics in relationships, and I think the misunderstanding costs people enormously. When I describe the early months with Daniel, the way he remembered everything, the intensity of his attention, the feeling of being more seen in 3 months than I had been in my entire life, most people hear that and think it sounds wonderful. It did sound wonderful. It felt wonderful. That is precisely the point. Love bombing does not feel like a manipulation tactic when you are inside it. It feels like finally being chosen. It feels like the specific relief of being truly known by another person after years of feeling slightly invisible. And if you are someone who has spent decades making yourself smaller, who has learned to need less and ask for less and expect less, that feeling of finally being fully seen is extraordinarily powerful. It becomes the standard by which you measure everything that follows. So that when the intensity inevitably recedes, as it always does, because no one can sustain that level of performance indefinitely, you spend enormous energy trying to understand what you did to make it go away, what changed, what you could do differently to get back to the beginning. You spend your energy trying to return to a feeling that was never what it appeared to be. And in the process of that trying, of that constant, gentle accommodation of the distance between who he was in the beginning and who he was revealing himself to be, you do the most important work of the pattern without even realizing it. You practice silence. You practice explanation. You practice the art of making someone else's behavior your responsibility. You practice all of this so thoroughly and so habitually that by the time the pattern is fully established, it feels less like a trap and more like a personality. Less like something being done to you and more like something you are choosing. That distinction between a trap and a choice is one of the cruelest features of this kind of relationship. And it is why so many women stay inside patterns long after they have begun to sense something is wrong. Because from the inside, it looks like choosing. It takes a doctor asking 4 words, or a sister's voice on the phone, or a text message from a single initial on a dark Monday night. Something from outside the pattern, something that breaks the internal logic of it just enough to let in a different kind of light. And in that light, finally, the shape of the thing becomes visible. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. I could not unsee it. And I am glad. As hard as those 3 weeks were, as exhausting as the legal process was, as lonely as the guest bedroom at Joy's house felt in the middle of the night with a newborn, and a grief I was still processing, and a life I was rebuilding from a foundation I had almost lost entirely. I am glad I saw it. Because the alternative was Eleanor growing up watching her mother practice silence, watching her mother make herself smaller, watching her mother explain away what her body already knew. And I could not give her that inheritance. I had a different one to pass on. The third pattern I want to talk about is the one the doctor identified, the body keeping the record. Because I think this is the pattern that saved me, and I think it is the one that gets talked about the least. We live in a culture that privileges the mind over the body. That treats feelings as data only when they can be explained, justified, and evidenced. We are taught to interrogate our instincts, to ask ourselves whether we are being rational, whether we have proof, whether what we are feeling is real, or whether we are, as Daniel always gently implied when I came to him with a concern, letting our anxiety get the better of us. And so we become expert self-interrogators. We become the prosecutors of our own experience. We demand evidence from ourselves that we would never demand from anyone else. We call instinct paranoia. We call awareness anxiety. We call the body's record-keeping irrationality. And in doing so, we hand over the most reliable early warning system we have. The body is not dramatic. It does not catastrophize. It does not invent things for the purpose of making your life more complicated. When it signals discomfort, when it signals danger, when it keeps you awake at 2 a.m. with a feeling you cannot name but cannot dismiss, it is responding to information, real information. Information that your conscious mind may not yet have assembled into a legible shape, but that your nervous system has already processed and flagged and is working very hard to bring to your attention. My body flagged it for months, through disrupted sleep and low-grade anxiety and headaches and a heaviness I attributed to pregnancy and a persistent, unnamed sense that something in the texture of my life was not what it appeared to be. I silenced every single signal. And I had been practicing silence for 30 years. I was very good at it. And it took a doctor who looked at the physical evidence of that silence, the cortisol levels, the stress markers, the placental blood flow, and said out loud in a quiet room, "This is what a body looks like when it has been telling the truth for months and nobody has been listening. I am listening now. I have been listening every day since that room. I am still learning how. It is the most important education I have ever undertaken. And I want to pass it on to every woman who is sitting somewhere right now trying to decide whether what she feels is real enough to act on. It is real. The question is never whether it is real. The question is whether you are ready to let it matter. I hope you are. I hope this story helped, even a little. I hope it gave you something to carry with you. Not fear, not suspicion, just attention. The simple, radical, self-honoring act of paying attention to what your own body is already trying to tell you. There is a question I get asked more than any other when I tell pieces of this story to people in my life. The question is, did you ever see it coming? And the honest answer, the answer I have worked very hard to be able to give without shame, is yes. And no. Yes, in the sense that my body saw it coming for months. In the sense that there were moments, small and fleeting and always immediately explained away, that contained in them everything I needed to understand the full picture. The flash of coldness when plans changed. The comment about a friend framed as concern. The way he had of going very quiet after time I spent with people outside of him, and then being entirely warm by morning. The inheritance conversation, the joint account, all of it. I laid end to end, told a story. I just was not reading it end to end. I was reading it one piece at a time in isolation through the specific filter of a woman who had learned early that her feelings were most welcome when they were manageable, and who had, over the course of 2 years with Daniel, been very gently and very consistently encouraged to apply that filter to everything. No, in the sense that what he was doing was specifically designed not to be seen. It was designed to operate beneath the threshold of what a trusting person would question. Small enough to miss, patient enough to be invisible, constructed with the specific understanding that the woman he had chosen was someone who had spent her whole life giving the benefit of the doubt. I did not fail to see it because I was foolish. I did not fail to see it because I was naive. I failed to see it because I was doing exactly what I had been trained my entire life to do, and because he had identified that training from across a room at a dinner party in October and built his entire approach around it. That is not a character flaw. That is a pattern, and patterns, once you understand them, can be changed. Not easily, not quickly, not without work that is sometimes tedious and sometimes painful, and sometimes requires you to sit with a discomfort that feels disproportionate to whatever triggered it. But they can be changed. I am changing mine. Slowly, imperfectly, every single day. For Eleanor. For the grandmother she will never meet but whose eyes she carries. For the floor that is still standing. And for every version of myself that deserved better than silence and kept quiet anyway. I want to close this story the way it began. Not with drama, not with resolution that ties everything into a shape cleaner than real life ever actually offers, but with truth. Because truth is what this channel is for. Clara Meadows is not a finished story. She is a woman in process. She is a woman who got it wrong for 2 years and got it right in 3 weeks, and is still, every day, learning the difference between a feeling she should trust and a habit she should examine. She is a woman who has a 3-year-old child with her grandmother's eyes, and a sister who answers on the second ring, and a doctor she went back to see just to say thank you. She is a woman who still thinks about the women who took a card and put it in their pocket and never unfolded it. Who still hopes they find their way to the unfolding. Who made this story as much for them as for herself. If you are one of those women, if you have something folded up in a pocket somewhere, a feeling you have been calling something other than what it is, a body that has been keeping a record you have not yet agreed to read, I am not here to tell you what to do with it. Only you can know that. But I am here to tell you that the reading is possible, that the unfolding does not have to be dramatic, that it can begin as quietly as a kitchen table and a legal pad and a cup of tea going cold while you write down everything you can remember and see for the first time, the shape of the thing. It can begin with a phone call to a sister who answers on the second ring. It can begin with a doctor who asks 4 words in a quiet room and hands you a card and trusts you to know what to do with it. It can begin anywhere. It can begin now. With you. In whatever room you are sitting in, with whatever you are carrying, with the simple, courageous, entirely possible decision to stop explaining away what you already know. Your body is not lying to you. It never was. Stay quiet. Stay aware. Break the pattern. And if this story reached something in you today, if it sat with you in a way that mattered, please share it with one woman who needs to hear it. Not for the views, for her. Because the most powerful thing a story can do is find the person who needed it most and make them feel, for even a moment, less alone inside whatever they are carrying. That is what this channel is for. That is what we are building here. One story at a time. One pattern brought into the light. One woman reminded that what she feels is real, and what she knows is worth trusting, and what she deserves has never been silence. Thank you for being here. New stories every week. We will see you in the next one. Stay quiet. Stay aware. Break the pattern.